Most people believe the explanation is clear. They believe that if they just say the right words, add enough detail, soften the tone, and make their intentions clear, respect will follow. This belief feels reasonable. It feels mature. It feels civilized. And it is completely wrong. The instinct to explain does not come from strength. It comes from perceived judgment. You explain when you feel evaluated. You explain when you sense doubt. You explain when you believe someone else has the authority to decide whether your choice, boundary, or behavior is acceptable. The moment that belief appears, the hierarchy has already shifted, and not in your favor. This is the dangerous social myth. If I explain myself clearly, I'll be respected. In reality, the opposite happens. The more you explain, the more you signal uncertainty, and uncertainty invites assessment. Assessment invites challenge. Challenge erodes authority. Human beings do not respect explanations. They respect stability. When someone explains themselves emotionally, they are not clarifying facts. They are broadcasting internal movement. They are revealing that their position is not settled, that it can be influenced, that it needs validation. The listener may not consciously think this, but their nervous system registers it instantly. This is why explanation is usually triggered not by misunderstanding, but by fear of disapproval. Most explanations are not answers to questions. They are defenses against imagined rejection. You sense skepticism. You feel tension. You anticipate pushback. And instead of holding your ground, you begin talking. You justify. You soften. You add context. You try to make yourself reasonable. And the moment you do that, something subtle but irreversible happens. You place the listener above you. Explaining positions the other person as the judge, the evaluator, the one who decides whether your reasons are good enough. You are no longer standing in your choice. You are arguing for permission. Even if the listener never asked for an explanation, your behavior communicates that one is required, that your position is provisional, that it can be negotiated. This is the exact moment authority collapses. Authority is not loud. It is not aggressive. It does not argue. Authority is the quiet assumption that your position stands unless you choose otherwise. Explanation replaces that assumption with negotiation. And once something becomes negotiable, respect begins to drain. This is why powerful people rarely explain themselves emotionally, not because they are secretive or arrogant, but because they are anchored. Their decisions are already settled internally. They do not need agreement to feel stable. They do not need understanding to remain grounded. They do not rush to resolve discomfort in others by sacrificing their own position. When someone questions a powerful person, the response is often minimal. Sometimes it is silent. Sometimes it is a short statement of fact. Sometimes there is no response at all. And this unsettles people who are used to controlling interactions through pressure, because pressure only works when the other person moves. Explaining is movement. Defending is movement. Justifying is movement. And in social dynamics, the one who moves first gives up leverage. This is why the urge to explain feels so strong. Silence feels dangerous to the unanchored. Silence creates uncertainty. It leaves reactions unresolved. It forces others to sit with their own discomfort instead of handing it to you. Explaining relieves that tension, but at a cost. You trade short-term comfort for long-term status. Most people never notice this trade. They only notice that the more they explain, the more they are questioned. The more they justify, the more they are tested. The more they try to be understood, the less they are respected. And they assume the solution is a better explanation, more detail, better tone, more logic. But the problem was never clarity. The problem was positioning. Explanation collapses authority because it communicates that your stance depends on reception, that if others disagree, you might need to revise, soften, or defend. This turns every interaction into a subtle referendum on your choices. People feel invited to weigh in, to challenge, to push, to negotiate. This is not because they are malicious. It is because humans are wired to test boundaries that appear flexible. Explanation makes boundaries flexible. Standing does not. Before we go deeper into why explanation trains disrespect, tap like and hit subscribe. Because what comes next reveals the moment authority collapses. When you start defending what was never up for debate. And this is where identity activation begins. The shift from validation seeker to self-anchored presence. From needing others to understand you to being comfortable with being misunderstood. From explaining to embodying. From reacting to pressure to containing it. Self-anchored people do not rush to fill silence. They do not argue for their worth. They do not defend decisions emotionally. They allow time to pass. They allow reactions to the surface. They let others reveal whether their interest is curiosity or control. And here is the law you must internalize before anything else makes sense. Respect erodes the moment you position yourself as needing approval. Approval seeking sounds polite. It sounds reasonable. It even sounds moral. But psychologically, it signals subordination. Authority does not ask to be accepted. It simply remains. The rest of this protocol will show you exactly why explanation trains disrespect, how silence reverses hierarchy, and when, and only when, explanation can be used strategically without weakening your position. But none of that works until this first illusion is shattered. Explanation is not clarity. It is a downgrade. The human mind does not interpret behavior the way we think it does. We like to believe people listen to our words, weigh our reasons, and then arrive at fair conclusions. In reality, the brain makes judgments before logic ever enters the room. It reads tone, timing, certainty, and emotional movement first. And this is why explanations so often backfires. When you explain yourself, you believe you are offering transparency. But the unconscious mind of the listener reads something very different. It reads uncertainty, not because your reasons are weak, but because the act of explaining itself suggests that your position is not settled, that it needs reinforcement, that it might collapse without agreement. This is the critical distinction most people miss. Clarity is not the same as self-justification. Clarity is neutral. It states what is. Self-justification is emotional. It tries to protect what is, and the brain is extremely sensitive to that difference. Clear communication sounds like, "This is what I'm doing." Self-justification sounds like, "Here's why I hope this is acceptable." One communicates stability. The other communicates vulnerability. The more emotional weight you attach to your explanation, the more the listener feels invited to judge it. Not consciously, instinctively. Their nervous system registers that your stance depends on their response. And once dependence appears, hierarchy tilts. This is why confident people are often assumed to be correct without explanation. They don't rush to defend their position. They don't overclarify. They don't fill silence with reassurance. Their certainty does the work for them. People may disagree internally, but they hesitate to challenge openly. Not because the confident person is always right, but because confidence signals internal alignment. Alignment is power. Over-explaining breaks that signal. It creates the impression of internal debate spilling outward. You're not just sharing information, you're sharing anxiety. You're showing that the situation is unresolved inside you, and unresolved internal states make others uncomfortable. Discomfort invites evaluation. This is why over-explaining communicates emotional instability. It suggests that you are trying to control the outcome through words rather than through presence, that you are managing perception instead of standing in position. The listener may not articulate this, but they feel it, and once they feel it, they adjust how they treat you. Notice how this plays out socially. The person who explains the most is questioned the most, interrupted the most, asked to justify again and again. Their explanations never quite satisfy, not because they're unclear, but because explanation itself trains others to probe, to test, to ask follow-ups, to negotiate. Meanwhile, the person who says less is rarely pressed. Their statements are taken as final. Their boundaries are respected faster. Their silence is filled with assumed meaning, and assumed meaning almost always favors authority. This is because calm silence feels more authoritative than perfect logic. Logic requires engagement. Silence requires adjustment. When you explain, you are working. When you remain silent, others work. They interpret, they project, they self-regulate. And in social dynamics, the one who forces adjustment holds power. Silence also triggers an important internal response in others. Am I missing something? That question creates caution. It slows aggression. It reduces entitlement. It forces people to second-guess themselves rather than you. Explanation does the opposite. It removes mystery and replaces it with accessibility, and accessibility invites control. This is where most people panic. Being misunderstood feels dangerous. Silence feels risky. The urge to correct, clarify, and defend becomes overwhelming. But this urge is not wisdom. It is conditioning. You were taught that misunderstanding must be fixed immediately, that tension must be resolved, that silence is awkward, that clarity is always virtuous. In power dynamics, these beliefs are liabilities. Learning to tolerate being misunderstood without collapsing is not arrogance. It is self-command. It is the ability to hold your position without rushing to secure agreement. It is knowing that not every silence is a threat, and not every question deserves an answer. This is the affirmation block. Not spoken, but embodied. I do not need to be understood to remain grounded. I do not need to explain to maintain authority. I can let others sit with uncertainty without rescuing them. When you internalize this, something profound changes. You stop over-talking. You stop defending reflexively. You stop leaking emotional energy into explanations, and people respond immediately. Conversations are slow. Questions soften. Challenges decrease. Not because you argued better, but because you stopped arguing at all. And this leads us directly to the law that governs everything you've just read. The more you explain, the more others feel entitled to evaluate you. Evaluation is not neutral. It places you below the evaluator. Every explanation invites a verdict. Silence closes the courtroom. Explanation does not end questions. It creates them. This is the part most people never realize until damage is already done. The first time you explain yourself, it feels harmless, reasonable, even mature. But socially, that first explanation rewrites the rules of engagement. It tells others that your position is open to discussion. And once something becomes discussable, it becomes testable. This is how explanation quietly trains people to challenge you. When you explain a boundary, you invite debate. When you explain a decision, you invite evaluation. When you explain a refusal, you invite negotiation. The other person may not even intend to push, but the structure of the interaction now allows it. You have moved the boundary from statement to conversation, and conversations can be steered. People begin questioning you more once you explain once, because you have demonstrated that pressure works. You have shown that uncertainty exists, that with the right tone, the right timing, or the right emotional leverage, you might talk more, clarify more, bend more. Humans are adaptive. They repeat behaviors that produce access. This is why explanation never stays isolated. It creates a loop. First comes the explanation, then comes justification, then comes defense, then comes authority loss. Each stage feels logical at the moment. You explain to be understood. When that isn't enough, you justify being accepted. When that still doesn't settle things, you defend to protect your position. And by the time you're defending, the hierarchy is already inverted. You are no longer standing in authority. You are reacting to challenges. This loop is subtle because it feels like communication. But psychologically, it is submission disguised as dialogue. The difference between emotional explanation and factual communication is critical here. Factual communication is brief, neutral, and complete. It does not seek agreement. It does not manage feelings. It does not soften the truth to reduce discomfort. Emotional explanation does the opposite. It anticipates reaction. It pads meaning. It is reassuring. It tries to control how the message lands. And the more emotion you attach, the more control you surrender. This is why manipulators deliberately provoke explanations. They are not curious. They are strategic. They ask questions that sound reasonable, but are designed to pull you into justification. Why would you do it that way? Don't you think that's unfair? Can you explain yourself? Each question is a hook, not for information, but for leverage. Once you start explaining emotionally, manipulators gain data. They learn what you care about, where you feel insecure, what makes you defensive, what tone pressures you, what justifications you rely on. With that data, future challenges become easier, more precise, more effective. Explanation teaches others how to challenge you. This is why some people seem endlessly questioned, interrupted, and debated, while others are rarely pressed at all. It is not intelligence. It is not competence. It is positioning. One group treats boundaries as statements. The other treats boundaries as discussions. People respond accordingly. When boundaries are discussed, people push. When boundaries are statements, people adjust. This is also why explanation creates entitlement. Once someone feels they have the right to question your reasons, they feel entitled to weigh them, to approve or reject them, to negotiate terms. And over time, this entitlement hardens into expectation. They expect explanations. They expect access. They expect emotional labor. Refusing to explain later then feels like a violation, even though it isn't. It feels rude to them because you trained them that explanation was part of the relationship. This is how well-meaning people accidentally create dynamics that later feel impossible to escape. If this is changing how you see pressure, silence, and hierarchy, tap like and hit subscribe. Your support matters because it helps this message reach people who are ready to stop explaining for comfort and start letting stability hold the frame. And the way out is not aggression. It is deliberateness. Deliberate responders do not explain reflexively. They pause. They decide whether a response serves clarity or erodes position. They understand that not every question deserves an answer, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. They separate information sharing from approval seeking. This is the identity transition that changes everything, from reactive speaker to deliberate responder. Reactive speakers fill silence automatically. Deliberate responders use silence strategically. Reactive speakers explain to reduce discomfort. Deliberate responders tolerate discomfort to preserve authority. Reactive speakers think being understood is the goal. Deliberate responders understand that being stable is the goal. Once this shift happens, challenges decrease naturally, not because you became harsher, but because the reward structure changed. Questions no longer yield access. Pressure no longer produces movement. Manipulators stop investing energy where returns vanish. Ordinary people become clearer and more respectful. Interactions simplify. And the core law crystallizes. Explanation turns boundaries into discussions. If you want boundaries to hold, they must not require defense. If you want respect to remain, your position must not depend on acceptance. Explanation feels cooperative, but in power dynamics, it is often corrosive. Silence achieves what explanation never will, because silence does not negotiate. It does not soften. It does not ask to be understood. Silence simply holds position. And in human psychology, the one who holds position controls the interaction. Explanation confronts directly. Silence pressures indirectly. Confrontation invites resistance. Silence invites adjustment. When you argue, justify, or defend, you step into the emotional arena with the other person. You give them something to push against. Silence removes that surface entirely. There is nothing to grab, nothing to counter, nothing to escalate. And because humans are wired to resolve tension, that unresolved space becomes uncomfortable. That discomfort is not weakness, it is leverage. Silence creates pressure without confrontation because it transfers responsibility. When you stop explaining, the emotional burden shifts. The other person now has to deal with their own assumptions, their own expectations, their own urgency. They must regulate themselves instead of regulating you. And self-regulation is work. Most people would rather provoke a reaction than do that work. This is why silence forces others to slow down, to second guess, to reassess tone, to reconsider whether pushing is worth the effort. The moment you stop feeding the interaction emotionally, the other person feels exposed. They become aware of their own intensity, their own impatience, their own attempt to control. Silence holds up a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see. Humans also project meaning onto silence. This is unavoidable. When someone speaks, meaning is provided. When someone remains silent, meaning is assigned. And people almost always assign meaning upward. They assume confidence, restraint, authority, or disinterest, rarely insecurity. Silence feels deliberate, even when it is simply contained. That assumption alone elevates your position. This is why calm silence often earns more respect than perfect logic. Logic can be debated. Silence cannot. Logic invites counterpoints. Silence invites caution. The person across from you begins to wonder what you see that they don't. Why are you not reacting? Why are you not rushing to correct them? That uncertainty dampens aggression and entitlement. The discomfort people feel when they can't read or influence you is the same discomfort manipulators rely on creating in others. Silence reverses that tactic. Instead of you feeling pressured to respond, they feel pressured to interpret. Instead of you defending your stance, they question theirs. Power quietly changes hands. It's critical to understand the difference between silence and avoidance. Avoidance is fear-based. It retreats. It hides. It hopes the problem disappears. Silence is not retreat. Silence is containment. It stays present without engaging emotionally. It does not flee the interaction. It simply refuses to be pulled into unnecessary movement. Avoidance leaks anxiety. Silence communicates stability. People can feel that difference immediately. Avoidance feels evasive and invites pursuit. Silence feels settled and discourages escalation. One signals weakness, the other signals control. This is why silence works best when paired with grounded presence. Eye contact without tension. Still posture. Neutral tone when you do speak. No rushed gestures. No nervous fillers. Silence embodied this way becomes an emotional boundary, not a wall, but a perimeter. Others sense where they stop. Over time, this changes how people interact with you. Conversations become shorter, questions become cleaner, demands become requests, or disappear entirely. People stop testing because testing yields nothing. They stop pushing because pushing feels awkward. They stop challenging because challenge has no traction. Silence does not need to be permanent to be effective. It only needs to appear at the right moments. When pressure is applied, when explanation is demanded, when urgency is manufactured, when guilt is deployed. Silence at these moments collapses the tactic. It communicates, "This will not work here," without ever saying it. This is the integration point. Silence as emotional containment, not withdrawal. You are still present, still aware, still capable of response. But response is now chosen, not forced. You speak when it adds clarity, not when it relieves pressure. You explain when it strengthens position, not when it defends it. And this brings us to the law that governs silence completely. Silence shifts psychological pressure away from you and onto others. Pressure is the currency of control. Whoever carries it loses leverage. When you stop explaining, you stop carrying it. Others must now decide how to proceed without your emotional participation. Most will adjust, some will expose themselves, and a few will retreat. All outcomes favor you. This is where the transformation completes. Not at the level of technique, but at the level of identity. The moment you stop explaining is not just a behavioral shift. It is a psychological reorientation. You move from performing yourself to embodying yourself, from defending your position to being the position. Explaining is something you do when your center is outside of you, when you are still checking reactions, still measuring approval, still adjusting yourself to maintain acceptance. Embodying is what happens when your center moves inward. Your choices no longer require external confirmation. Your boundaries no longer need verbal reinforcement. Your presence carries what your words used to compensate for. This is the person who owes no explanation. Not because they are dismissive, not because they are arrogant, but because their authority is settled internally. Let's recap the laws that brought you here. Explanation is triggered by perceived judgment. Explanation positions others as evaluators. Explanation invites debate, testing, and negotiation. Explanation trains people to challenge you. Silence shifts pressure outward. Silence forces others to self-regulate. Silence creates assumed authority. Taken together, these laws reveal a single truth. Respect is not produced by words. It is produced by self-command. When you stop explaining, people behave differently around you almost immediately. Conversations slow down. People choose their words more carefully. Questions become cleaner, less invasive. Demands soften into requests. Some people grow more respectful. Others grow uncomfortable. A few disappear entirely. None of this is accidental. People adjust their behavior based on where they sense power resides. Around someone who explains, people feel entitled to probe. Around someone who defends, people feel permitted to challenge. Around someone who remains still, people feel compelled to adjust. This is why speech must become a strategic tool, not a reflex. Reflexive speech leaks information. Strategic speech delivers precision. Reflexive speech tries to manage discomfort. Strategic speech tolerates it. Reflexive speech reacts to pressure. Strategic speech lets pressure do the work. Respected people speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand timing. They don't fill silence. They don't rush clarity. They don't argue for acceptance. They allow space to exist. And in that space, hierarchy forms naturally. Watch how respected people move. Their movements are unhurried. Watch how they pause before answering. Watch how they listen without nodding excessively or reassuringly. Watch how they decide without narrating their internal process. They are not withholding. They are contained. Containment is the highest form of confidence. It signals that your internal state does not require management by others. That disagreement does not destabilize you. That misunderstanding does not threaten you. That silence does not frighten you. This is why authority is not announced. The moment you announce it, you reveal that it was uncertain. Authority is assumed when there is nothing to prove. This is also why the urge to explain must be reconditioned at the identity level. You will still feel it sometimes. Silence will still feel uncomfortable at first. Being misunderstood will still trigger old instincts. That does not mean you are doing it wrong. It means you are withdrawing from a dependency you were trained into. Each time you resist the urge to explain unnecessarily, you reinforce a new identity. Each time you allow silence to exist, you strengthen your center. Each time you respond deliberately instead of reflexively, your presence grows heavier, more grounded, more undeniable. This is not about winning arguments. It is about ending the need for them. This is not about controlling others. It is about commanding yourself. This is the dark psychology protocol lock-in, not as manipulation, but as self-sovereignty. You speak when speech adds clarity, not when it relieves pressure. You explain facts when needed, not feelings when challenged. You let time do what words cannot. You allow others to reveal themselves, and you carry this knowing quietly. If this protocol showed you why silence does what logic never can, tap like and hit subscribe, and comment this below. I don't negotiate my authority, because when the urge to explain disappears, pressure shifts outward, and respect stabilizes naturally.